Here we are in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Georgia. It's a mountain region that's a part of the larger Appalachian Mountains that run all the way up the East Coast. It's a part of a formal region. Today, we're going to talk about regional analysis. I'm Mr. Coulter, and this is Human Geography. Today, we start our final topic of Unit 1, Topic 1.7, Regionalization. The world is a big place, and if we tried to look at everything at the world at once, we would never be able to understand all of the themes and things that go on. So the way the geographers break it down to understand it better is regionalization. So they categorize these spaces into smaller units in order to help us divide up and understand. The thing I'd compare it to is the way that a writer would divide up a book into chapters so that you can get to the information you want to see. You would never just say, like, here's an entire book with no divisions. It would make it really hard to understand it. And then we classified them in order to help us to talk about the same things when we're talking about regions. There are a few different types of regions that we're going to get into today. So our first one is a formal region. Sometimes they're called uniform regions or homogeneous regions, but they're regions that are united by one common trait. So if you can look at something and say, all of these people speak the same thing, or all of these people are under the same government, or there's a physical feature, that's all a formal region. So the reason I've got Pan Am on there from the Hunger Games is each region did a specific task. So all of those people were in the same industry, so that's why their regions were formal regions. So let's start with a physical region. So a physical formal region is a place that all shares the same physical trait. A good example of this would be the Sahara Desert. It is a region because the desert extends through all of it. So that is a formal region, the Sahara Desert. Another would be a political region. So national, state, county, city borders are all formal regions. And you live in more than just one. So you can live in Georgia, which is a part of the United States, which would be a national region. And then you're in a county, we're in Fulton County, Milton, Georgia. All of those borders are different regions that can overlap. You're never limited to just one region. And then cultural regions are an example as well. So regions that have cultural similarities or one trait that they share would be an example of a cultural region. This is a map of India broken up by the language spoken. So you can see the majority in that central part is Hindi. And so that is a region where all the people speak Hindi. They're part of the formal region at a national level, which is India, but they are broken up into formal regions of language as well. So cultural regions are examples of formal regions too. Which brings us to our next type of region, functional regions. Functional regions, I think a lot of times are the ones that are the hardest to understand for people, but they are nodal regions and they're organized around a certain focal point or defined by an activity that occurs across the region. Often they're unified by communication or transportation that's centered around a node or a central point. So in the map right here, we can see this is a functional region of sports fans across New York and Massachusetts. So you can see there's a line where you have the Knicks extend out and you have Knicks fandom versus Celtics fans. And you see that, interestingly, the Celtics line and Knicks is different than the Red Sox and Yankee line. So the Yankees extend further than the Knicks, even though both teams play in New York. This would be an example of a functional region, like where the fan bases are, because the function is the activity of rooting for a sports team. So let's look at some examples of functional regions. So a radio station region is an example of a functional region because they have communication signals like radio waves. The way that they go out from the tower and how far they go would be a part of that functional region. So the best way to think about this is if you're ever on a road trip and you have the radio on and you're driving away from a city. So let's say you're listening to 97.1 The River, the classic rock station in Atlanta. If you have it on and you're driving north to the mountains, you're going to hit a certain point away from Atlanta where you no longer pick up those radio waves. Everything inside of the region where the radio waves reach is a part of that functional region. And then everything where you don't get those radio waves are no longer a part of that region. So functional regions, it's by the activity. That activity is the radio station, and that is the functional region. Next, we've got a delivery region. So this is another functional region. You have one restaurant, and let's say Pizza Hut has the range of where they can deliver out from that one. This example is a Papa John's in Michigan, but you can see the Papa John's is located in the middle, and then the full extent that they will go is a certain distance away from their store. That is a functional region because the activity is the delivery of pizza. And then another example, our last one for functional regions, are transportation regions. So these are regions of public transportations like buses or subway. This example is the London subway above us, and you can see all the people are connected. So everybody who would use and take that public transportation to work or to school are a part of the functional region of the London subway, and everybody outside of it is not in that region. So functional region is probably the most confusing to understand, but if you can grasp the idea that they're based around an activity and everyone inside of it does that activity, then you understand functional regions. And our last type of region that we're going to look at this year is a perceptual region. So perceptual regions, also known as vernacular regions, are defined by the informal sense you have of a place. And they're wildly different depending on where you are. So it's the way that you think about or the way you perceive a place. The exact boundaries only depend on the person who is saying them. So this is a perceptual region of America only based on what is our worst natural disaster for the region. But you can see this isn't a formal region or any sort of functional region for those things. This is just the way that somebody drawing this map viewed those areas, and it could change depending on who makes the map. So some examples of this in the United States. The Midwest, the idea of what the Midwest is a perceptual region. It's a vernacular region because it's like whatever people picture it to be. So would you include Chicago in the Midwest? That's up to the person describing it. Same thing with New England. Different people call New England different things. And then the Deep South or the South is another example of a perceptual region. Let's look at the South as a specific example. So we live in the region that most people would call the South, but you may not consider yourself a Southerner being in Metro Atlanta. Some people do, some people don't. And that definition of what the South is not clear. That's why it's perceptual, because it's something that different people think. Some people include Texas, Missouri, Arkansas as a part of the South. Some people don't. Some people view parts of Pennsylvania as part of the South. A lot of people don't view Florida as part of the South, especially South Florida. And it's all the way that you would define it. So some people would define it as what states were the SEC in. That could be an example of the South. Another one would be what states split off during the Civil War. That's a way to look at the South. People who say y'all, that would be one. I don't say y'all, but my wife does. She's from Alabama. Big cities, sometimes people say, well, that's not Southern. So that definition of what the South is constantly changes. And you can see the map in the middle is they used a lot of different definitions of the South to define the area and found that only the darkest green matched all 6 criteria. It's important to understand that not everybody agrees on what those perceptual regions are. And that's why they're perceptual. They're in each person's mind. So let's look at the formal regions of the world and the way that we're going to break up the world to understand it this year. This is according to the human geography coursework, the way that they divide up the different formal regions of the earth so that we can look at them. So let's start with what we're familiar with. North America. North America is Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But a lot of people, when we're studying it, break it up into something called Anglo-America, which are the 2 American countries that descended from Great Britain. So Canada and the United States would be in Anglo-America, which means that Mexico would be either a part of Middle America, which is Central America and Mexico and the Caribbean, or Latin America, the countries that all descend from a Spanish-speaking or Latin-speaking language. So that would include Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America would be Latin America. Or you could break it up that it's just South America, which starts after Panama and is the whole continent of South America. All of those are formal regions that we're going to use to describe the Western Hemisphere. Same thing with Europe. Europe breaks up into the continent of Europe, which divides somewhere in Russia before you get to Eastern Russia. But you can break that down even further. Mostly, we'll break it up into Western Europe, which is Germany and everything west of it, and then Eastern Europe, which is most of the countries that were a part of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But you can break it up further into Mediterranean Europe, all the countries that are on the Mediterranean, Northern Europe, Central Europe, because some people don't want to be referred to as Eastern, but they aren't Western. And there are all these different ways that we can break up the European continent. Looking at Asia, there's a lot of regions there. There's the Middle East, which is around Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Peninsula, and then the other countries that are Muslim countries in that area. There's Central Asia. There is East Asia, which includes China, the Koreas, and Japan. And then Southeast Asia, which is Vietnam, Thailand, and all of those countries that extend out into the Pacific and the South China Sea. And then South Asia is India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the other countries in that region. So we can use all of those to describe different parts of Asia. But don't forget, because this is one that gets confusing for people, East Asia is China, the Koreas, and Japan. Southeast Asia is Vietnam, Thailand, and all of the countries like Indonesia and the Philippines. South Asia is Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and the countries around them. That's a confusing one for people. And you can even extend the Middle East into North Africa. Some people connect, because of religion similarities, Middle East and North Africa to be part of one region. North Africa is its own region compared to sub-Saharan Africa. So we break up the continent often into two groups. So North Africa are the countries that border on the Mediterranean above the Saharan Desert. And then sub-Saharan Africa are the central and southern part of the continent. And we typically compare those because they have similar levels of development in those different parts of the continent. And then finally, Australia and the Pacific. You can see that it extends a little bit below Southeast Asia. And that's all the island chains that exist in the Pacific Ocean around Australia. All right, that is it for 1.7. Remember to think of the different regions we talked about, that formal regions are ones that all share one concise trait, that functional regions are ones that are based around a node or an activity, and then perceptual regions are ones that we perceive in our mind that aren't real drawn out regions, but they're ones the way that we see them. Also, make sure you learn the different regions of the world and the way that they're defined by human geography. So that's it for Unit 1 in notes. We're going to move on next time to Unit 2. But remember that this is just one of our steps in our journey to better understand our world. I'm Mr. Coulter, and that was Human Geography.